What's going on, everybody? I'm Matt Dimech.
And I'm Madison Elliott.
And today, we're bringing you our Week 12 picks for fantasy football stardom situms. For my first pick, I'm going to be taking Austin Ekeler. With Brian Robinson Jr. out, Austin Ekeler has flourished in the running back one role. He's put up 17.7 fantasy points per game in that stretch. And what's made Austin Ekeler so impressive is even if the run game's being clogged up, he's so versatile as a receiving back, and he's still able to make an impact on the game. Last week, he hauled in 8 of 9 targets for 89 yards, and this week, he has an ideal matchup with the Dallas Cowboys, who have been one of the worst defenses in the NFL against running backs. They're currently giving up 150 rush yards per game, which has them ranked at 31st in the league. Ekeler is sure to make a reliable RB2 this week.
For my first start of Week 12, I have Tennessee Titans wide receiver Calvin Ridley versus the Houston Texans. The Tennessee Titans have struggled offensively, but Calvin Ridley remains crucial in their passing game. Quarterback Will Levis has developed a solid connection with him. The Titans often playing from behind, Ridley is set to see plenty of opportunities. The trade of DeAndre Hopkins earlier in the season has also worked in Ridley's favor, increasing his target share. This week, Ridley faces a Houston Texans defense that turns the 8th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers, which bodes well for his potential. Despite missing one day's practice due to illness, there are no signs that he will miss time. Given the favorable matchup and his consistent role, Ridley is a solid wide receiver 2 option in 12-plus team leagues this week.
For my second stardom pick, I'm going to be taking Ladd McConkey. Ladd McConkey is really starting to come into his own in this offense with Justin Herbert throwing to him. Last week, he had his biggest game of the season with 18 fantasy points. This came from 6 receptions for 123 yards on just 9 targets. He's really beginning to take a much higher volume with this team. In 5 of the last 6 games, he's gotten 6 or more targets, while in 4 out of the last 5, he's had 5 or more catches. So just really consistent production out of McConkey in the last couple of weeks. And this week they're taking on Baltimore, who have been one of the worst passing defenses in the NFL. They're currently giving up 280 yards per game to the throw. This should give Ladd the opportunity to continue his hot stretch.
For my next start in Week 12, I have Giants running back Tyrone Tracy Jr. versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. There's an inherent risk that comes with being part of this Giants offense. The Bucs defense has had plenty of holes, but in the first 2 weeks before the bye, it held San Francisco and Kansas City to about 4 yards per rush. Regardless, Tracy played a season-high 79.5% of offensive snaps in Week 10 against the Panthers, and he has multiple red zone touches in 3 straight games. Not to mention, he has 107 carries for 545 yards and 3 scores this season. For comparison, Saquon Barkley had 508 yards and 5 touchdowns on his first 107 carries for the Giants. Crazy numbers, and I'm not saying that he's necessarily Saquon Barkley 2.0, but he's definitely been impressive and someone you should definitely start this week.
For my first sit-in pick, I'm going to be taking Eagles wide receiver Devontae Smith. Smith has been in a bit of a rut in the last handful of weeks. He scored 3 points in Week 10 and before scoring 6 in Week 11. Since the Eagles' bye week in Week 5, Jalen Hurts has not been throwing the ball as often. They've really been trying to utilize the run with Saquon Barkley behind that stellar offensive line. He has not completed more than 20 passes in a single game since Week 5, which is hurting Devontae Smith's volume. He's only had 1 game with more than 4 catches since that bye week, and in half of the games since Week 5, he's only scored 15 points in half of them, and the other half finishing below 7. The difference in those games has been whether or not Devontae Smith breaks out and has a large scoring play. So because of the polarization and his boom or bust potential, I would advise fantasy owners to not run the risk in starting him.
For my first sit of Week 12, I have Dolphins wide receiver Jalen Waddle versus the New England Patriots. Waddle has been very modestly involved in this Dolphins offense this year. He has not topped 57 receiving yards since Week 1, despite being healthy and holding out his number 2 wideout role. Miami seems to be refusing to throw Waddle the ball. It just hasn't been happening. Could that change this week if Gonzalez shadows Hill? Sure, it's a possibility, but honestly, I'm not sure. If you have any better options, I would start them over Waddle until his involvement is more consistent.
For my final sit-in pick, I'm taking Alexander Madison. He's had not been very productive in the last handful of weeks. He's not had a game with more than 10 points since Week 7. Only 2 times this season has he rushed for more than 40 yards in a game. Now, most of his production does come as a receiving back, but in the last 2 games, even his targets are down, coming from 0 and 3. So this week, they're facing the Broncos, a defense that's both top 7 in yards allowed against the run and against the pass. and they've given out the third least amount of points this season as a defense. I think with Madison's inconsistency against a really tough defense, I think it'd be best to find other flex options this week.
For my last sit of Week 12, I have Bears running back DeAndre Swift versus the Minnesota Vikings. Coach said he's hopeful to play on Sunday versus the Vikings, but he did not practice Wednesday after a day of rest and is being reevaluated on Thursday night. Swift was limited to a 57% offensive snap share, his lowest since Week 3, and the Bears lost to the Packers Sunday. Since Week 6, Minnesota has allowed the second lowest rushing yards per game and yards per contact after attempt and the 11th lowest explosive run rate. Between the nature of this matchup and the injury, I keep Swift on your bench this week.
That's going to do it for our fantasy football stardom sit-em picks. Good luck out there, fantasy owners.